Hey, how are you guys doing this afternoon? My name is David. I'm the pastor here. I'm glad you guys are with us today. So this is the first of really 5 different services we'll have looking at Christmas. That feels like a lot. It's 4 Advent services and then 1 Christmas Eve service. And I guess the question is like, why 5 services for Christmas? And one of the reasons for me is that there's just a common understanding that there's something special about Christmas. And it's not just if you're a Christian or just if you believe that Jesus came to the world to save and forgive us, that everything in our culture points towards Christmas. And for us at Highlands, if our culture is looking at something, we want to pay attention to that. Larry King, I don't know if you guys know Larry King, those of you that are old enough to know Larry King. Larry King was an interviewer way back before they had podcasts, and Larry King said that if he could choose just one person to interview from the course of human history, he would choose to interview Jesus. King said that he would like to ask Jesus if he was, this is a quote, if he was indeed virgin born, because the answer to that question would define history for me. So there's something about Christmas. There's something about what we're talking about at Christmas that makes us make movies. It makes us sing songs. It makes us put up lights. It makes us hope that things could be better and even that we could be better. And one of our values here at Highlands is to be a city on a hill. And that means that when the culture is moving after something, we want to speak into that in the best way possible, in the most life-transforming way possible. And so Christmas gives us a chance to do that. The way we're going to do that over the next 5 weeks is that we're going to adopt this template that we didn't come up with it, but it's called the Advent Conspiracy. We're not using all of it. If you go online, you can look that up. But for us, what we're going to do is we're going to use that to shape some of the time we spend together because we believe that there is some things that are lost during Christmas that should be regained. And so we're going to look at 4 different topics over the next 4 weeks that we think will help us live better into preparing for Christmas and live better in this Christmas season in a way that encourages everybody to grab hold of more of life. So our first talk tonight, we're going to talk about what does it mean at Christmas to worship fully? Because honestly, across time, one of the things that has gotten the church in the most trouble is worshiping part way, is taking elements of Jesus or elements of the Bible or elements of Christianity and saying, I like that, it fits with me, and I'm going to leave the rest to the side, and sort of being one person over here and a completely different person over here. There's a word for that, hypocrisy, and it's a word that gets used to describe the church a lot. And worshiping fully means to let go of hypocrisy and actually give your attention fully to the thing that you say you care about. So I've read this online. I'm not totally sure it's true, and some of you are going to disagree with me, but I've read that multitasking is a myth. That it doesn't really exist. And that appeals to me because I struggle to multitask. But here's what I know. Multitasking, if it's not a myth, it's not a good way to strengthen relationships. I know that Jane hates when she's trying to talk to me and I'm doing something else. Just today, she had to repeat something to me because I wasn't listening because I was focused on my phone. I know that when my kids are having the hardest time communicating with me, or when I'm having the hardest time communicating with them, is when we're trying to multitask. That multitasking may work with things, but it doesn't work with people, and it doesn't work with relationships. And so when we talk about worshiping fully, what we want to say is we don't want to multitask our focus during this season. It means we want to live as if it's actually Jesus that we're celebrating, because as Christians, that's what we say we're celebrating. Now, we're not interested in everybody else doing it, and it doesn't matter if the person at Walmart or Starbucks tells you Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays. That's kind of missing the point for us. It's about us, and what are we doing, and what are we really living into during this season. So we're going to look at a passage from the Bible about 2 women that do a great job of worshiping fully. Their names are Elizabeth and Mary. You're probably familiar with this story, but I'm going to give you guys a little background going into this. First, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is married to a guy named Zechariah, and Elizabeth and Zechariah are older. We know that they're far beyond the normal years for having children. And an angel comes to Elizabeth and Zechariah. They haven't ever had any kids. And the angel says to them, you're going to have a son. And this son is going to prepare the way for the Savior of the world. He's going to prepare the way for the one that's going to come and set the world free. And then Elizabeth becomes pregnant. Then a few months later, Elizabeth has a cousin named Mary who is far too young to probably be having a kid. And she's not married. And she hasn't done the things that you're supposed to do in order to have a kid. She's in her teens, and an angel comes to her, and the angel meets with her, and he says, Mary, you're highly favored, and so you're going to have a child. And Mary says, well, I don't know how I'm going to have a child because I don't do the thing that you do to have a kid. So what am I going to do? And essentially the angel says, don't worry, God's going to take care of that. And kind of what's crazy about that is that Mary is excited about that news. I don't know about you. I would not be excited about that news. I have a teenage daughter. I would not be excited for her to bring me that news. But there's something going on in Mary that is so excited that God would want to use her, that God would love her that much that she forgets about her own reputation. And we're told that she rushes off to sort of like tell this news and to obey where God's taking her. And that's where we're going to pick up the story. A couple of other things that be important to know that'll help you in this passage. One is that Mary and Elizabeth were Jewish. They were Israelites, and they shared a dream. And in fact, all the people of Israel kind of shared this dream that God was going to come and deliver them and set them free. Now that's a dream that exists all across the Israel of the Old Testament, of the first part of the Bible. God actually comes at one point and uses Moses in the book of Exodus to set the Israelites free from slavery in Egypt and bring them into the promised land. And currently in the culture that Elizabeth and Mary were in, they were being occupied by another country. Which means they weren't totally free. And they had these dreams of freedom. People would name their kids. Mary is probably named after Miriam, Moses' sister, as a sense of there's going to be a promise. Jesus, his name is actually in Hebrew, it's Yeshua, which means Joshua. It's where we get that name from. And Joshua was the one in the Old Testament who led people into the promised land. And so there was this idea, there was this hope in Mary and in Elizabeth that one day all these things these prophets were saying were going to come true, right? And that the powers that kept people oppressed and in slavery were going to be toppled. And Mary and Elizabeth think that their pregnancies are the big part of this coming to fruition. And that's really why they're excited, is that they live in dark days. You're going to hear about this guy over the next few weeks, Herod the Great, who was not great at all, was a horrible leader and was brutal. And Mary and Elizabeth believed that what God had promised to them, and even the two sons that God had put in them, were the promise that they were going to be set free. And so we're going to read this story, and they're going to break into song at some point. And it's like two friends knowing that something awesome is about to happen. The last thing that I think is important to know about this passage as we jump into it is that this passage is written by a guy named Luke. And here at Highlands, we believe that God has inspired and has breathed out the scriptures, but we also believe that they're written by people. And so their personalities and their processing and all of that comes through. It doesn't negate, those things aren't competitive, but one comes through even as the other does. And there's a couple of things that really sat with Luke that we're going to see in this passage. And the first is that Luke, especially in chapters 1 and 2, wants people to know that God does what God says. God does what God says. That's why somebody like Mary could be excited about what was happening. The other thing is that God wanted to expand his promise of freedom from Israel to everyone. Right? And there's going to be this praise in this passage that we read that really is opening up the possibility that God wants everyone to come into freedom because of what he's doing. So we're picking up here. It's in Luke chapter 1. I'm going to start in verse 39 and read. It says, "At the time Mary got ready and hurried to a town in the hill country of Judea, where she entered Zechariah's home and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. In a loud voice she exclaimed, 'Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear. But why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me? As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy. Blessed is she who has believed that the Lord would fulfill his promises to her.'" Here we go. We have these things. Elizabeth comes in and she says, something happens in her and she says, "I'm going to have a kid, but you're going to have a kid, and your kid's going to be more incredible than my kid." And I'm honored by that. There's a humility that exists even from this older woman to this younger woman, something we could stand to have a little bit more of in our culture. And then she goes on and she says, God's going to do it because he said he's going to do it. And she's just excited that God can be trusted. In the midst of that, here's what happens. Mary sings. And I don't know if you're like this, but like sometimes you get so happy. Sometimes in my house when we're happy, we sing. We just sing things, and it's silly and it's fun, but it's really just us being thankful for life. And so this is what happens. It says, "Mary said, 'My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant. From now on, all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me. Holy is his name. His mercy extends to those who fear him from generation to generation. He has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their inmost thoughts. He has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things, but he sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel, remembering to be merciful to Abraham and his descendants forever." That's the everybody, "just as he promised our ancestors." And then it finishes by saying Mary stayed with Elizabeth for about 3 months and then returned home. So I just want to take a few minutes here and I want to look at some things that we can see in how these women were worshiping fully, and then maybe how we could apply those to ourselves, especially in this season of Christmas. The first thing that we can see is this, that their worship was full of amazement. Their worship was full of amazement. I almost said full of wonder, but I think wonder is not something that maybe we use enough in our culture. But the idea is that they were amazed first that God would use them at all, right? Like Elizabeth is so amazed to just be in the presence. She doesn't have to be the centerpiece, right? There's a humility to her. And it's a humility that'll end up being reflected in her son, John, and the sense of privilege and favor of being used by God, no matter what the role is that exists. It's a product, or it's not a product, it's an aspect of amazement, right? It's a byproduct, probably, of amazement. She says, "Why am I so favored that God would even think of me?" She has been noticed. In the midst of everything God does, Elizabeth knows that she has been noticed. And this carries over into Mary. Mary recognizes the honor given to her to have God actively involved in her life, right? It's a sense of privilege, right? That she didn't earn it and she didn't deserve it, right? So their worship is full of amazement. Their worship is also full of hope. Right? Their worship is not just thankfulness about what God has done. Their worship is full of a hope about what God is going to do. Because here's the truth about Mary and about Elizabeth, is that they were the forgotten. Women who never had children, young women, poor women, people that were occupied. They didn't hold the positions of power. They didn't hold the positions of wealth. And it didn't matter. They were hopeful that God was going to do what he said he was going to do. Their worship was full of amazement. Their worship was full of hope. And finally, their worship was full of community. An exchange, a back and forth, a celebration together, and an offer of community for two women that were probably pretty isolated in every other aspect of their lives. That's what full worship is. That's what really giving our full focus to the idea of what Christmas means should produce in us. So what do we do about that? How do we apply that really quick? Like I said, we just saw these three things that were in their worship, and I want to talk about how we need to take time to engage those things in our lives this Christmas season. The first thing we need to do in the midst of our busyness, in the midst of our desire to multitask and to get things done, is we need to stop and take time to be amazed. We need to take time to be amazed. Mary and Elizabeth are a picture of the believer's amazement in sharing in the blessings of God. And the intent is that we would do likewise. We need to engage humility. Right? Eve, the first woman, and Adam, what they said is give to me what I want. But Mary, who's often called the second Eve, said, let it be unto me as you have said. And at Christmas, it's easy for us to think, I just want to get what I want out of this holiday. I just want to get what I want out of this season, or out of this week, or out of my kids, or out of my spouse, or out of my coworkers. I just want what I want, God. Why won't you give it to me? And when we do that, we don't worship fully. We stop being amazed because we stop being humble to say, God, I'm blessed to be given what I have. And so I trust you. What you want for me is what I want. We need to take time to humble ourselves. We need to take time to remember what God has done. Everybody gets overwhelmed at Christmas. We all do. You're going to get overwhelmed if you haven't gotten overwhelmed. It's just kind of too much. But nobody has a reason to be overwhelmed more than Elizabeth or Mary did. Right? Elizabeth, I can't even imagine. I'm not close to Elizabeth's age. And if I found out Jane was pregnant right now, oh gosh, I'm just tired all the time anyway. Right? It would be terrible. And then to think Mary and the burden that she was going to take on, like how was she going to do this? She was going to tell this guy she was supposed to get married. She was going to tell her parents, this is my story. And they were going to say, that's what you're going with? Right? Nobody had more of a reason to be overwhelmed than these two women. But they remembered what God had done and what God had said, and peace reigns among those who serve God as they understand that they have a place in His plan. We need to remember what God has done. I don't know if this year's been tough for you. I don't know if it's been great for you, but I know you're here. I know you've been a blessing because I've watched you do that, Highlands. Remember what God has done. Take time. And then the last thing is this, and this may seem silly and this may be hard for some of you, but we kind of need to take time to sing. Right? Because something happens when we sing. Sometimes we sing because we're happy, and then sometimes we sing and something happens within us. Worshiping fully means that we take what we sing and we let it become how we live. And we need to take time to do that this Christmas. We need to take time to sing about what God has done, if not for us, then for the world, through His Son, Jesus. The second thing we need to do is we need to take time to be hopeful. We need to take time to be hopeful. And that's not as easy for us, honestly, as it was for Mary and Elizabeth. And that sounds weird. But the reason it's not as easy for us is because for most of us, we're not the poor. We're not the forgotten. Even if it maybe in certain cultural contexts we're less well off than other people, which most of us aren't even that, but across the world as it's concerned, we are the rich. We are the powerful. Right? And so for us, kind of the first step in being hopeful is to not put our hope in those riches. Is to not put our hope in that reputation, being the strongest, the best, having the most, having it first, but instead to reverse reputation. Mary says that God scattered those who were proud in their inmost thoughts. He brought down rulers from their thrones, but He lifts up the humble. It's easy to become blind to how materialistic we can get over the holidays. to how much we can make it about money and status and things and whose party did we get invited to and who came to our party and who thought our Christmas was impressive. And this text reminds us that God values the hearts of people and not what they possess. If we're going to start to really be hopeful in a way that leads to worship, we've got to reverse our understanding of reputation. And then we have to remember not just what God has done, but actually what God is doing, which is bringing hope. The passage that Maggie read when we lit the Advent candle said, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. For unto us a child is born, and unto us a son is given." You know what God is doing in our world? He is bringing hope through his son, and hope is something that our world needs. I don't know if you know this, but for the third year in a row, it's never ever been like this. Life expectancy is down in the U.S. once again, and it's not down in the places that you would think it is. It's actually down. People aged 25 to 62 are dying more, primarily due to issues related to addiction and suicide. Our world needs hope, and we need to get down with what God is doing. We need to get involved with what God is doing. We need to take chances and reach out in different ways. We need to know, just like Mary and Elizabeth knew, God is mindful of me, and he wants to use me. We need to take time to see what he has done, but we need to take time to see what he's doing, and he's getting close to hopeless people, and he's setting people that are bound up free, and he's wanting to use you and me to do it. We need to get involved if we're going to worship fully. And finally, just really quickly, we need to take the time to be in community with people. We need to go see people who are encouraging this season. Christmas is one of the loneliest times of the year for a lot of people. And we need to actively go to people that will encourage us, because it's going to be tough out there. But we also need to invite people in to be encouraged. We can't just be takers. We also need to be givers. We need to be Mary who goes, and we need to be Elizabeth who invites and celebrates and doesn't make it all about us, but takes time and space even when a lot is happening for us to say, I'm so thankful for you, and guess what I see God doing in your life. We need to take time to be in community. So I just want to wrap up really quick. I always try to give you guys a couple of practical applications. A lot of this is thought-based, and so you can walk out of this space and you can wonder, well, what do I do with that? Now, one of the things I always hated is the idea of like feeling really good about a talk somebody gave, but then not really being able to know what to do with this. So I just want to give you guys two things really quick, just two quick things that I'm going to say this week I want to encourage you to do. One is a personal thing and one is a community thing, because both of those affect and are a part of our relationship with God. Here's the personal thing. This is the simplest thing, but it may be the most difficult thing that I'll ask you to do. And that is sing praise this week. Just sing. Just sing. In your car, in your shower, in your kitchen, to your kids, to your coworkers. Just be kind of the crazy singing person. Sing praise. Something happens in our hearts, right? It's almost like Grinch growing like. It's weird. But when we really start to sing praise, I don't like most Christmas music. I actually have a theory about Christmas music that it's not that good, that any regular music is better than Christmas music, because otherwise they would play Christmas music all the time. And they don't. But I know. That's can get me in trouble with a lot of people. But here's what I want to say. I'm trying to sing more this Christmas season. There's one Christmas song that I've always loved, and it's O Holy Night. And for you or for me, what I do is just this week, I just sit down with the words and I just say them. And I just sing them in my heart as I say them. I would encourage you to say them out loud. Right? A thrill of hope, a weary world rejoices. Fall on your knees, oh, hear the angels' voices, right? Because a divine night has come. Just step out, sing, praise. And the second one is this, in community. The community application is this: ask better questions this week. If you're married, ask your spouse. If you got kids, ask your kids. If you got parents, ask your parents. If you have coworkers, ask your coworkers. If you go shopping, ask the person behind the counter. Ask better questions this week. I'm going to give you guys a few. I'm not a great question asker, but maybe this will get you started. Ask somebody, what are 2 to 3 things that you're going to remember about this last year? That's simple. It's easy. What are a couple of things you're going to remember about this last year? Here's another one. What's something you'd like to see or do over the holidays? Right? Could you imagine just stopping the person at Target and saying, hey, what's something you want to see or do over the holidays? And then finally, what's great about this season for you? Or what's difficult about this season for you? Why do we ask questions? Why does that matter? Because that's a way that we start to listen, we slow down, we engage in community. We start to listen to what God is doing, and we get involved.